So I wanted to talk today about, I've been feeling pretty awful this last week since the murder of George Floyd. A lot of things have come up that have made me rethink a lot of stuff. And so I wanted to talk about racism in the vegan movement. And obviously this, what I say applies to everyone else too, but I wanted to talk specifically to this group because I'm a vegan and it's my community, and I guess I've been shocked by the response that I have seen. I made myself some little notey notes here so that I'll hopefully not ramble and stay on track about what I want to say. I've been disappointed because I had expected that vegans who understand the rights of animals would also understand human rights, at least. And when I say racism, should I really say racism or should I just say, ignorance? Because if a person was raised in a predominantly white community, they've never been exposed to seeing racism against somebody else, maybe they just don't know what's going on. But what I'm seeing is people taking a position out of ignorance, it seems, but taking a position and saying this is how it is. And so if you're ignorant and you're wanting to learn about something, you'd listen. And you listen to the people that, that were being impacted. And so, yeah, I think that those biases are there and they're coming out. And I think that's racism. So, yeah, I guess I had thought that, if a person is vegan, that it's all peace, love, and yogurt, right? I was watching, this first came up, I was watching a video by Happy Healthy Vegan, and he had run for city council and had extra campaign money that he wanted to donate. And he'd talked about this before, so he made a video. And one of the organizations that he donated to, I'm talking about $100, was Black Lives Matter. And so then that was about it. And I looked down in the comment section and I was just amazed at the things that people were saying. And then I was seeing it on other vegan channels too. The ones that actually would speak up, because so many were just silent about the whole thing. You kind of had to almost try hard to be silent, right? And then, just the general public and videos and same themes coming up over and over again. And I want to talk about some of those. One was the Black Lives Matter organization. And just the assumption that it's corrupt, that it's violent, and that it's black supremacist. I actually saw that come up a few times. And so what struck me was that if it was any other crisis, like say a hurricane or something like that, people don't sit around thinking, oh, I don't know if I should donate that, they're probably just pocketing the money and I don't know. People look at this thing, they say these organizations are addressing this issue, I'll donate. Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden, oh no, it's corrupt, where's the money going? That sort of thing. And then, oh, that's violent. Even though we have Black Lives Matter organizing all these peaceful protests. So if they're a violent organization, then wouldn't everybody be around being violent? They wouldn't have any peaceful protests and speakers, so yeah. And then black supremacists, as if they're sitting around saying, oh, we want all white people to go back to Europe, by asking for equal rights, they're black supremacists. So then, yeah, and then the whole Black Lives Matter name. So other organizations, there's plenty of them where they're advocates for certain groups. And those those are allowed. That's fine. But a black organization, oh no, it's supremacist. We want to say all lives matter. Now we want to not allow black people an organization that advocates for them and their specific problems. And it reminded me of back when I was young, very young. I'm 50 years old now. And back when I was young, I was born in 69, right? So grew up in the 70s and early 80s before I left school and high school. And there was that organization called Take Our Daughters to Work Day or whatever. And there was this whole stink about like, well, what about our sons, But this was coming out of a time when, even when I was very young, there had just been the women's rights movement, and most women were stay-at-home moms and homemakers, and if you wanted a profession, there was like you could be a nurse or a teacher and things like that, but that's kind of what it was. And really kind of the expectation was that success would be finding a man that was successful, and that's what I grew up with. And so having Take Your Daughters to Work Day is something where you can expose them to something that they might not be encouraged to do. But there's this thing that wants to kind of suppress that like, no, let's make it for everybody. Let's ignore that there is a specific problem. And so I'm not saying that like Take Your Daughters to Work Day is anything like Black Lives Matter. I mean, they're very different things, but it's the sentiment, that's trying to ignore that there's a problem. And what it also allows people to do is ignore that there's a problem and at the same time appear egalitarian, like I don't see black and white, And I think the argument or the idea underlying all of this is really that people just don't think that there's a problem. Like it was just this one man that got killed by this really bad police, and he's been arrested and he's going to be tried, and that's all we need to think about. I mean, why are we up in arms about this whole thing? And yeah, it's like there's no problem. There isn't a problem. And so somehow we've forgotten about the Civil War, which was 100 years ago. Well, what was that, 1860s? 1960s? Like more than 100 years ago. And we only had a civil rights movement that was dealing with lynchings and people of color not being able to shop in the same shops, or go to the same restaurants, use the same facilities. This was in the 1960s. I was born in the 60s. So it took that long, and still we have had problems. And do people really think that the civil rights movement just fixed everything and that it's all better and that we don't have problems of race in this country? Well, of course we do. And so kind of to pretend like it's not going on forever so we can feel comfortable and not have to think about this, I guess is what it is. Yeah. And then people will use statistics. They'll drag out statistics and do all these mental contortions about, well, if you look at this specific town in per capita, and if they were armed or if they resisted arrest and blah, 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 and all these things, and trying to find a way to say, oh, actually, when you look at it like that black people aren't that much more likely really to be targeted for being killed, harassed, etc., arrested, jailed. So yeah, people are looking for ways to pretend that like the civil rights movement fixed everything and everything's fine. And so getting more specifically than getting beyond just the specific comments from vegans, something that goes on in the vegan movement that I've noticed is using slavery as an example of the problems in factory farming. So saying, the problems in factory farming are like slavery. And the problems in factory farming are horrible. If people actually knew what went on in there, we'd have a whole lot more vegans. That's all I can say. But people don't know. They don't know. And so vegans use the example of slavery to explain how bad it is. But on the other hand, at the same time, we don't think that you, descendants of slaves, have a problem. Look how gruesome it is. Look how gruesome the animal rights situation is. Let's compare it to slavery. But you black people in the United States who are descendants of slaves, lost your language, lost your country, lost your ancestors, moved to a country or taken to a country where you're still second-class citizens. You can't go home. You're not treated like you're at home. And when something comes up like this, like the death of George Floyd, vegans can't stand in solidarity with people of color in our own movement. Can't take a minute to say Black Lives Matter. And yet we use their story to try and explain our movement. And it reminds me a lot too of the problems with how people talk about religious people in our movement. We use, the Seventh-day Adventist studies, health studies, and talk about the healthfulness of a plant-based diet, because a lot of people are still concerned that they can't eat a plant-based diet and be healthy. And we use that, but that's a religious group, and so we use their story, and yet we say bad things about religious people. And I've seen it an awful lot. Yeah, what do we want our movement to be? Do we want it just to be for a few people? Because there are so many different ethnic groups, different racial groups in the world. Most people are religious in the world. So do we not want to include those people? Do we want them to feel like they're not welcome? And so is this just a movement to make us feel better about ourselves? Like we're virtuous? Or are we trying to change people's minds and make a difference for animal rights? And I oftentimes, when I bring something up, when I've responded to comments, people use the appeal to futility argument, which vegans so often hear, which is, I can't bother with animal rights. I mean, first of all, if we're going to do anything, we need to take care of all the human rights issues first, and then we can start thinking about animals. As if a person couldn't just move their hand a little bit farther one way and grab, instead of the dairy milk, the oat milk, or the coconut milk, or the soy milk, or the hemp milk, or whatever, for their cereal, or whatever. So now I'm hearing vegans say, well, I can't just take a minute to deal with a human rights issue that's on the forefront right now, where we might be able to, if we respond as a group, make a difference, make some real changes. And I can't bother to take even a minute to stand in solidarity, to say Black Lives Matter. And yeah, because, if you look at it, there's just so many terrible things happening in the world. I just can't take the time. And how much time are you spending on animal rights on working for animal rights, that you can't take out a little bit of time to stand in solidarity with the people of color in our own movement. So that's all I had to say. I expected more of vegans. We should know better. And I think that, I hope that we'll use this situation to take a close look at our own movement and see that we're not being inclusive. And if we really want to make a change for animals, that we need to bring in everyone and make everyone feel welcome.